Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
If you're listening to this podcast, then you're in great company. We've got thousands of listeners who have a thirst for continuous improvement and raising standards in business. Whether your interest is in quality, sustainability, or risk standards, I'd love to welcome you as a member to our online platform for all things ISO, the ISology Hub. The ISology Hub is the leading place to get access to all of your online resources, from in-depth training courses through to our very popular coffee break training, to templates and action plans and many other resources to help raise standards. As a member, you get access to over 100 courses, taking you from learner to practitioner to leader. The ISology Hub has all the resources that you need, which will really help to make your life easier and to help improve compliance in those business critical areas. So if you'd like access to learning and compliance resources ranging from data privacy to environmental management, anti-bribery, business continuity, quality, health and safety, to name just but a few, the list is endless actually, then we'd love you to come and join us. Just head over to the isologyhub.com. Hi and welcome to the ISO Show. Today I'm delighted to be joined by the ESG Manager at Culligan, Martin. So Martin Murden has recently been involved in a journey for understanding the organisation's greenhouse gas emissions, the very technical aspects of the calculations and quantification as part of his role as ESG Manager at Culligan, and has successfully achieved verification for the organisation's greenhouse gas emissions. And today Martin's going to be telling us about his journey and providing some insights and tips for those that might be interested in raising standards when it comes to achieving net zero and embarking on that journey. So welcome, Martin.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, great. So before we begin, Martin, could you provide an overview of your background and your role at Culligan?
Yeah, of course. So I'm an ESG manager at Culligan International, part of a central ESG team. I tend to focus more on the E side of the ESG. So my role includes looking after our carbon emissions, our carbon reduction plan, and looking at things like the way that we use water and other natural resources and trying to identify initiatives to reduce the impact that we have on the environment.
Okay, great. And could you tell me something that not many people know about you?
It's not a great start, but I really struggled with this particular question. I think some of your previous guests have had some really great answers on famous friends that they may have, some brilliant sporting achievements or some hidden talents, and I really struggled to try and think of anything that would sound interesting. But I did earlier this morning, something came to my mind. I remember a few years ago my nan had been investigating our ancestry, and she phoned me up one day and announced that one of my ancestors had invented Turkish delight. And I know it sounds a little bit of a random thing to say, but in terms of things that I don't think many people know, including myself up until a couple of years ago, apparently, somewhere in the dim and distant past, my ancestors are involved in the creation of Turkish delight. So just something that just came to me.
That's interesting, isn't it? So next time I have some Turkish delight, and I love Turkish delight, by the way. I think it's a bit of a love-hate relationship, isn't it, with Turkish delight? A bit like Marmite. I'm definitely a lover of Turkish delight. And next time, well, actually, every time I have a bite of Turkish delight, I'll be thinking about you, Martin, and your ancestors.
The really strange thing at the time when we were told is literally a couple of weeks before that, I'd gone round to my sister's house and she'd asked me to try out a new flavour of milkshake that she'd just created.
Yeah.
And it happened to be a Turkish Delight milkshake.
Oh,
So the coincidence of that is very
yeah, there's
strange.
something being passed down in the genes there, obviously.
Yeah, must be.
Well, I'm interested in finding out a little bit about the history of that, but I don't think we're actually going to get around to talking about greenhouse gas emissions, which actually, although you said you didn't have anything interesting, I think it'd be really interesting to find that out. But anyway, and obviously you weren't around at the time to fully appreciate how that all came about. Actually, no, now that we're on the subject, do you know anything more about it?
I didn't really get too much more information into it. I'm not sure if I've got any kind of I don't know, claim to the Fries
Yeah.
Empire or anything like that. Probably not.
Oh, one to look into then, I think. So, yeah, so you can pass the information on to the next generation.
I think if when we solve climate change and I don't have a role anymore, then sure, I might have to start looking into how else to you know to earn some money. So I might go back into Turkish Delight.
Yeah. Okay, great. So that's a little bit about your background and an interesting piece of information and not many people know about you. So let's talk about Culligan International. And for those organisations and listeners that haven't heard of Culligan International, can you just explain a bit about the organisation and what it does?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as the name kind of implies, we are an international business, and if you go onto our corporate website, it'll tell you that we are the global leader in water services. Our solutions provide cleaner, safer, better tasting water. The Culligan name itself is probably not that well known in the UK and Ireland, but chances are if you're refilling a bottle from a water cooler, it's probably from one of our brands. If you've got a boiling water tap in your kitchen at work, it could well be one of ours. If you've got a water softener at home, or if you're drinking from a water fountain at a school, an event, or a train station, it's probably been installed by a Culligan engineer. So we have quite a wide breadth of solutions that are available. We've got around 100 businesses worldwide, and we have direct operations in over 40 countries now. We have a total of more than 600 sites, ranging from warehouses and offices to production and water bottling plants. We also have more than 7,000 vehicles that are delivering, installing, and maintaining our equipment. So quite a large business, more than 15,000 people working at Culligan at the moment. So sustainability is at the heart of our business because of the solutions that we provide. So people that are drinking from Culligan products are helping to avoid single-use plastic. If we can promote a culture of people refilling bottles rather than buying plastic bottles, it also helps to reduce emissions as well throughout the entire value chain, as well, of course, keeping our consumers hydrated with great tasting water.
Okay, great. Well, that helps to provide some context for, obviously the topic of conversation today, which is all about greenhouse gas emissions and verification of your greenhouse gas statements. What led Culligan's to seek third-party verification of its Scope 1 and 2 emissions? And, was there any specific driver, like regulatory or, investor requirements there, or just purely to time with your sustainability goals?
Absolutely. I think it's kind of a multi-pronged answer, this one. So we're very conscious of regulatory requirements, and because we're a global business, there are all sorts of mandatory reporting coming through the pipeline now, obviously in Europe, in places like Australia, Mexico, Canada, California, where we're having to ensure that the data that we're providing is accurate, and being able to provide third-party assurance on the figures that we're providing is essential for us. At the same time, we want to be able to provide that reassurance to our stakeholders, internal and external, that our emission results are as accurate as possible. Alongside that, the ESG team themselves, we want confidence that the figures that we're looking at, there's no irregularities in there, so that we can use that as a robust baseline from which to deploy our decarbonisation strategy.
Okay, great. And in terms of that decarbonisation strategy, are you able to expand on that a little bit more, Martin?
Of course. So last year, Culligan published a number of commitments. One of those was to reduce its Scope 1 and 2 carbon emissions by 40% by 2035. We built our decarbonisation plan based on information that we had available to us internally, looking at what we use our vehicle fleet for, what our facilities are used for, how large they are, what kind of energy sources they use, and speaking to the individual business units to understand from them what is possible in terms of switching to renewable energy sources, reducing the amount of energy that they use, or switching to lower carbon vehicles for making their deliveries. So we had confidence in our ability to reduce our emissions, but we really wanted to be able to have that assurance that our starting point, that our baseline was as accurate as possible.
So was this your first time going through a formal verification process? And if so, how did you prepare for that internally?
It was. We've measured our carbon emissions for Scope 1, 2 and 3 since 2022, so this is the third full year now. And in order for us to really get into the verification process, we had to spend a lot of time speaking to Carbonology, who we'd selected as our auditor, to understand what the requirements were, what the priorities and the evidence that they needed in order to provide them with the information they needed to provide assurance. So a lot of careful planning and communication internally as well, so that all of our stakeholders, all of the data owners were aware of what would be required of them and when they needed to provide it by.
Did you find that, collating that information from different stakeholders internally, did that help to improve the level of accountability for those key people internally?
Yeah, I'd say absolutely. Over the last 3 years of collating information and data required for our carbon emission calculations, we have seen a year-on-year improvement in the accuracy and the accountability. However, having this extra layer of focus on it has meant that we've been able to identify potential gaps in some of the evidence that we've received, and those local data owners have taken that on board and been able to provide more information than they previously thought was available. For example, going to utility providers and asking for a breakdown of consumption over the year rather than just relying on the spend on the energy that had been previously reported.
Great. So it sounds as though that this process over the last couple of years, and since 2022, it sounds like you've refined that process internally. And so it's not just about the quality of data that's improved, but also the breadth and depth of data by the sounds of it, which obviously that's really helpful when it comes to the verification process. So how did you actually find the experience of working with Carbonology through that assurance process?
The experience overall, I think, was actually a lot better than maybe I was expecting it to be. I think it's very daunting when you're approaching something like an ISO standard audit for the first time. You don't really know what to expect, or what might get thrown up as part of the process. However, I think the way that we worked with Carbonology was really good. For us, having a process of daily review meetings and looking through our daily agenda and priorities it ended up working like a well-oiled machine, I would say. We all sort of came into those daily meetings looking forward almost to discussing the things that had been identified from the previous day, because these were all opportunities for us to improve the accuracy and improve the way that we capture that data going forward. And we've been able to filter some of those learnings through our entire business as well.
Great. I think, yeah, a lot of people think, an audit is something that's like a tick box exercise. So it's really refreshing to hear, some of the comments that you mentioned there about almost looking forward to it. And it's all about, making improvements. And I think obviously all businesses are on this journey together in achieving net zero. And it is challenging. It isn't easy. And I don't think anybody gets it 100% right, but it is about making small incremental changes and improvements every step of the way. So yeah, I'm pleased to hear that you sound as though you got a lot of value out of it. Were there any other kind of key insights or surprises that came out of compiling your Scope 1 and 2 data ready for verification?
We had a few surprises along the way, inevitably. I'm sure most people do. For Culligan, they were mostly positive ones, I'd have to say. So throughout the audit process, we exposed a few inaccuracies just in the original data, where data owners had accidentally added an extra zero or had accidentally selected gigawatt hours instead of kilowatt hours when they were uploading their submissions. So the carbonology auditor obviously gone through those and identified them, and even able to expand out so we could then have a look at similar potential issues that may have happened, and trying to identify sites that may have higher than average consumption data based on the information that we had from the audited site. So we were able to expand out and identify a few other areas where our emissions were overstated and sometimes understated, just by using a more holistic approach to the analysis. So no bad surprises, thankfully, but just having that process and following it through, again, it just gives the reassurance when you're responsible for this information and for standing in front of the board or for publishing your results at the end of the year, to know that you're doing it having had that level of assurance. It's very settling to the mind.
I was going to say, yeah, it is all about having confidence in that. And at the end of the day, we're all human. And although, some organisations might use carbon accounting software, and obviously with all the technology that we've still got human intervention in terms of entering data, doing the calculations, etc. So yes, I think it's always worthwhile, having somebody else dotting the I's and crossing the T's as well, just to ensure that everything is as you think it is. And more often than not, there will be a few different anomalies. And I think in some cases, where organisations have overcalculated just on to err on the side of caution, it's actually cost them more if they're looking at offsetting as well, which can be quite an expensive error to make. So obviously that information is useful to then take back to the ESG team. So what changes, if any, have you made to your data collection or reporting process as a result of that assurance work?
So we've already started looking at options. So going forwards, wherever possible, we'd like to try and connect our data to centralised sources rather than going to each business individually. And there are, I think, opportunities, for example, getting API links in place directly with our back office systems or even with the utility providers themselves, so that we're not reliant on manual intervention or double keying to populate the carbon data itself. Technology is obviously constantly advancing, and I think there are a lot of different platforms out there that can offer even more accuracy to the data collection process, or more efficiency to the data collection process. So we're hoping to be able to use things like OCR software to read PDF supplier invoices as well. And going forwards, ideally capturing the evidence that we need for the audit process at the point of data entry, rather than having to go out to all of our data owners a second time and ask for copies of the invoices that they'd already populated into a separate database.
Okay, great. So I can imagine that would make life so much easier as well when you're dealing with so many different sites globally as well. So it means that there's less, manual chasing of reports and information. Yeah, so that hopefully will make the process much more streamlined year on year, because obviously it doesn't happen overnight. It does take time to influence that change. Yeah, so that's really interesting to see how that assurance has had an impact on that. So mentioned earlier about accountability and being able to extract that information. So how did internal teams like operations, facilities or finance engage with the process? And were there any unexpected collaborations or challenges along the way?
To be honest, I was expecting a little bit of pushback. However, I was pleasantly surprised about the amount of buy-in that we had from each of our local business units. I think they really understand the benefits to their individual businesses as well of having this enterprise-wide verification that they can use. Most of the data owners that we'd approached had already collated their evidence for the initial data upload for when the carbon emissions were initially calculated, so it was minimal additional work for them. I'd say certainly nothing negative in terms of the process that we went through internally to provide all of that evidence.
Well, that's great that you had such strong buy-in, across different functions at Culligan International. That sounds as though it would make because obviously it's a challenging role, isn't it? Being able to coordinate and ensure that everybody is collaborating and they are on the same path. So obviously, I think having a clear strategy and objectives that are communicated across the organisation can certainly help to get that buy-in.
Yeah, some of these people are on the front line as well, so they're being constantly asked by customers or prospective customers to provide information about Culligan, its services and the impact that we have on the environment. So it actually gives them something extra differentiated to some of their competitors as well, to be able to say that not only have we calculated our scope 1 and 2 carbon emissions, but we also have a third party verification that proves that we've followed due diligence on that.
Yeah, so I guess that's helped to strengthen stakeholder trust as well. If different individuals within the organisation are talking about that third party verification. So that obviously brings some value then in terms of having that internal buy-in. So what other value would you say that third party verification has brought to Culligan? And has that helped strengthen stakeholder trust or improve reporting confidence internally?
100%. The initial reactions that we had from colleagues once we shared the news that we'd passed the accreditation was an extremely positive one. Initially, we were inundated with requests from our different business units around the world for copies of the ISO certificate that Carbonology had produced for us so that they could share it with their customers as well. So yes, having our emissions third party verified does give credibility to the claims that we've made publicly. I'd also probably add that the worry about greenwashing claims as well is never too far away from the thoughts of the ESG team. So it certainly helps us sleep a little bit better at night, knowing that we're not going to have to worry about anybody challenging any of the figures that we put out regarding our carbon emissions.
Yeah, I think that's the difference between kind of marking your own homework, isn't it, and having an independent accredited third party verifying it against an international standard. Because I think some parties might, claim, the carbon footprint is X, but it's not actually aligned against any kind of standard. And of course, you did this against ISO 14064 in terms of your verification, which is obviously from an international perspective that also helps to demonstrate further credibility because of the international adoption of the standard now, which seems to be increasing year on year. So now that you've got that verified data, how do you see that being used elsewhere across the business, or indeed with other stakeholders, like, for example, ESG reports or investor disclosures?
As I said earlier, sustainability is kind of a key focus area for Culligan, and not least because the products and the solutions that we provide are geared around trying to improve impact on the environment from both our customers, also our investors and our employees. Everybody's very interested in this information. So we've just published our third annual ESG report, and the information, including the verification, is referred to regularly, not just in that report, but also throughout a lot of our communications throughout the year. The ESG team are also presenting our annual progress to Culligan's Board of Directors next week, and this will inevitably be top of the agenda for some of those directors. I think it also proves that we're not keen to just jump on that net zero bandwagon, and we want to kind of take our time in understanding exactly what our emissions are today, and as a part of that we really need to dig deep into our scope 3 emissions. So that will be more of a short-term focus, I think, for the next 12 months, and hopefully being able to get third-party assurance on those as well that allow us to then use a baseline and continue that journey of understanding what is possible for reducing our scope 3 emissions as well as scope 1 and 2. So in short, we'll be using this data, the audit and the assurance in lots of different environments within the company.
So yeah, I was going to ask you about scope 3 emissions actually. So I'm glad you brought that up. So that's obviously, it sounds like a short-term objective in the next 12 months or so. Are there any other plans then for the medium and longer term in terms of Culligan's sustainability efforts?
Yeah, I think like a lot of businesses, scope 3 is a little harder for us to have any kind of reassurance over. We use predominantly purchase goods and services data to estimate our upstream emissions, and we need to really hone in on those and ensure that we have accuracy and consistency at the same kind of international standard level as the ISO 14064 that we've achieved on scope 1 and 2. The ESG journey itself, I think, is not necessarily a very linear one, as I'm sure you're aware more than anyone, Mel. So we will continue to adapt and flex as we go, and just trying to build momentum within the business for all of the things that Culligan can do, whether that's continuing to reduce our carbon emissions or the amount of other natural resources that we're using, or to promote our products as much as we can to avoid as much single-use plastic as possible throughout our consumer base.
Yeah, I think that's a really clear focus, isn't it? Over the medium and long term goals. So just finally, in terms of, for those listeners that are tuning in and they haven't gone through the verification process yet, for those organisations, what would you say is the biggest misconception about the process?
For me personally, I'd say it's probably a fear of the unknown. Partly in terms of the process and how big an ask it would be for a business. And as I said earlier, Culligan is a big business. We do have lots of different stakeholders and lots of data owners, and trying to understand what we're actually asking those people for. Until you actually start asking the questions and you approach those experts like Carbonology, it's always going to be daunting, and it's always going to be that big worry of, am I just setting myself up for a year's worth of misery, when actually for us, it was 8 days worth of preparation followed by 8 days worth of reviewing. Not a big thing, considering how much work has probably gone into a similar audit for your financial results. I think businesses wouldn't issue their financial statements at the end of the year unless they had gone through that audit process. And issuing your carbon emission results or your ESG report is probably as much of business as usual now as issuing a set of financial statements. So I would encourage people just to have those conversations. If you're working in sustainability or in ESG, I think you'll probably find that it's impossible to be an expert at everything, because ESG covers so many aspects, so many different things, and it's changing all the time. So we were very much reliant on that specialist knowledge of carbonology to help us understand that auditing your carbon emissions isn't actually difficult. And once you've got that process in place, doing it again next year will just be easier and easier as you go through each year, until hopefully it will be just as much as what we do as a business as the year-end process for our financial results.
Oh, thanks very much for those insights, Martin. Very wise words, obviously taken from experience there. So I really appreciate you sharing that with me today and our ISO show listeners. I'd just like to end with a couple of more random questions, actually, that I like to ask at the end of the podcast, which is, if you could gift a book to someone, what would it be and why?
I can actually answer this one honestly, because I have recently gifted a book to my old manager, and it was called The Coming Storm, in brackets, Why Water Will Right the 21st Century. And it's written by Liam Fox, who you may recognise was a Member of Parliament. And because I work in the water industry, when I picked up the book initially, it was just out of personal interest. But actually reading through it, it outlined a lot of the challenges that we as a society are likely to come up against as water becomes more and more scarce, especially fresh, clean drinking water. We're aware that there are parts of the world that have always struggled to get access to water, but that is becoming more and more of a problem. And that particular book was interesting for me because it also went into some of the almost dystopian horror kind of what might happen if parts of the world struggle to get hold of water. We've already experienced wars over things like accessing energy and other natural resources, so it's not all doom and gloom. Don't let me put anybody off reading it, because the author does really highlight a lot of the work that's going on and the solutions that are going on in the background. But it's one of those things that we never really talk about, especially in the UK, because we don't have any issues accessing water. But because of the industry that I work in, for me, it was a brilliant book to recommend to anybody else that I was working with in Culligan, because I think for us it highlights some of the challenges that society are probably going to see, hopefully not too late in the day, before we can address some of those.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think we're very fortunate, and obviously we're recording this in the UK, we're very fortunate in terms of our access to water, but there are so many countries and so many communities that don't have access to clean water. It is something that we do very much take for granted. So yeah, that sounds as though it would be an interesting read. I'm going to stick that on my Audible wish list. So it's The Coming Storm by Liam Fox, and we'll include the link to that in the show notes as well. And just one final question. What is your favourite quote that you'd like to leave our listeners with today, Martin?
So again, this is one that I think when I read the question, it kind of rolled off the tongue, because it's one that I've used quite a few times recently when I'm talking to sort of like-minded people that are working in climate change, in sustainability kind of arena, but sometimes it can be quite difficult to sort of stay motivated when some political pressures, among other things, are maybe trying to convince us that the work we're doing isn't coming to the fruition that we might expect. So When I was at a conference earlier this year, there was a speaker there, a lady called Clover Hogan, and she's founded a company called Force of Nature, which does climate training programs for young people. And one of the things that she'd said during this speech, which I keep coming back to time and time again, is that we don't need 100 perfect activists, but millions of imperfect ones. And for me, that quote kind of resonates really well, because I think it kind of highlights that nobody's perfect, and there's a lot of stigma associated with people that are trying to be so. And I think in order for us to get out of some of the challenges that we have around climate change at the moment, I think small actions can soon lead up to larger ones. So you don't necessarily have to give up eating meat every day in order to make a difference. I think if millions of people started adopting similar kind of approaches, then we could set a new norm. And I think the best way of tackling things like climate change is to ensure that governments and businesses can't afford to ignore that collective voice. So that's my sensible answer. My less sensible answer is a quote that I saw scribbled on the door of a toilet in London a few years ago, which just makes me giggle. And it literally just said, "Preserve wildlife, pickle a squirrel."
I wasn't expecting that one. We've got lots of squirrels here in Letchworth, Garden City, where I'm recording this. So I'm not sure I'll be pickling a squirrel anytime soon, Martin. But going back to the other one, the one, was it Clover?
Clover Hogan, yes.
Clover Hogan, yes. Yeah, I think that definitely resonates with me. I think a lot of businesses that are trying to tackle their organisation's greenhouse gas emissions, or even, just at home, I think it is just the making those small incremental improvements day after day. It doesn't have to be major, but all of those small incremental changes do add up. And I think as a collective, like you say, if millions of us are doing that, it can actually make a huge difference. Yeah, so on that note then, Martin, thank you very much for joining me today on the ISO show. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much for your insights and sharing your experience and words of wisdom in the field of ESG. That's been fantastic. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks again for inviting me.
Thanks for tuning in to the ISO show today. I'm sure that you'll agree that it's been really insightful hearing about Martin's experience at Culligan International and their journey. And some inspiring words there for all of us. Details of the podcast will be included in the show notes as usual, which you'll be able to get access to on whichever media player you're listening into. So if you don't want to miss any future episodes, and also if you'd like to ensure that this podcast gets out to a wider audience, if anything's resonated with you today that you think should be shared with others, then please do like and share this episode. And also don't forget to hit subscribe on your media player as well, because that does help us to get out to a wider audience. So thanks once again, and I look forward to catching up with you on the next episode of the ISO show.
Looking to achieve certification to an ISO standard, or just need a helping hand with ISO compliance? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com.